spend about $55,000 on things like architecture, engineering, and quality assurance to make sure that you get it right up front with a greenfield project. And that's if it is a greenfield project. Most of the software in your organization's been there forever, and there's nothing that you can do about it but spend more money if you want to fix the design, because it's really pretty expensive to bolt it on after the fact. All right, so what about if we do nothing whatsoever except wait for the bugs to roll in, somebody to publicly disclose a software vulnerability, come to us and say, hey, here's a problem, and we're going to tell the world about it in a couple of months. What does it cost us then? It cost us about $10K per bug, maybe, and it's about average. So does this say that if we don't expect there to be more than 5 disclosures on our product, that we shouldn't do anything at all except be reactive? It's easy to argue. It's easy to argue from the business point of view, and this is if you really care about application security and you want to see your company improve and build a practice around it, you have to be able to show that this simple analysis is a little too simple. So clearly there are a few things that we're not considering here, such as the impact to revenue if the schedule gets slipped by adding all this additional design up front, which actually argues against doing any design work whatsoever. But then there's the brand damage as well on the other side of the coin that is very difficult to put a dollar amount on. And again, most companies won't put a high dollar amount on it except in their existing customer base. So anyway, another point here is that even if we do design up front, usually we're not going to get all the security bugs out because it's really challenging. Even with the best people in the world, security problems still get missed from time to time. And somebody might find them if you're a big enough target. If it's a important product at a big software vendor, people are going to spend a lot of money looking for the bugs, no matter how much money you spend trying to eradicate the bugs. They want to make you a target because it's going to boost their career. So, again, how much money is it really worth spending up front? Don't know. What's the expected cost? So here's some data. We've been tracking a lot of data for years about how many problems we find, how severe they are, so on and so forth. And these are averages for C and C++ code. If you audit 1 million lines of C or C++ code, you would expect to find about 50 vulnerabilities that we would term critical. And to us, critical, as you can see up there, is basically remote unauthenticated bugs. And that's quite a lot of bugs. And then at other various levels, you're going to see basically that you're going to find almost 300 security problems per 1 million lines of C and C++ code. Those numbers are much lower for most other programming languages. They're about 1/5 of the size generally, rough rule of thumb. But the interesting one from our perspective is the one at the bottom. Per 1 million lines of code, for a large software vendor that considers itself a target, how many security vulnerabilities are they going to expect to see per 1 million lines of code, lifetime? So far, the answer seems to be about 1 per 1 million lines of code. So if I've got 300 bugs per 1 million lines of code, and only one of those is going to be the target, do I have to get all 300 of them? Because I can demonstrate to you pretty easily that you could remove 90% of those bugs and still field the same number of disclosures you would have fielded if you'd spent no money at all. So kind of the part of the key to doing this right is making sure you're finding the same kinds of things that the bad guys would be finding, leaving the stuff in the code that is bad but the bad guy isn't likely to have found is actually pretty good practice, all things considered. All right, so here's another thing that our application security expert is might point to. They said it's going to cost your company money and brand damage. I actually might measure brand damage based on the stock price when a vulnerability gets announced. What's that do to my stock price? You can see some data from a study done a couple years ago up here, but the answer honestly is it's a blip at best. It might take a dip on average of a half a cent, and then it goes right back up pretty quickly. It just takes a week or so to go back up, as if nothing ever happened. So, is the industry peddling FUD? Let's see how many people think the industry is peddling FUD right now. Excellent. And everybody else works in the application security space, is that right? All right. Good. So I think definitely, but not maliciously. I think people believe in the problem. They've got what they think is the right solution. They don't understand your business, and they're doing what they think is best. But it turns out that you should put a lot more thought into it rather than listening to the experts. I encourage you to be a free thinker. Okay? But, just because people are out there selling FUD, that doesn't mean that it's cost effective to be reactive. There's a lot of evidence that will point to it being cost effective, but you got to dig a little deeper. And for some companies, the answer might be it's not. That's okay. So here's, at a high level, an overall strategy for building a good application security practice. The first thing you have to do are identify the costs involved with what you're doing anyway. It turns out that most development organizations have developers that know a little bit about security. They care about it. They do think about it during design. And that's money you're already spending on security that you didn't know, and you want to surface that because you want to take that budget and you want to do something effective with it. So, it behooves you to go out to the engineering organization and try to get an estimate of what's getting spent on security. How many hours do they spend per product dev cycle on looking for their problems or, doing architecture that has security involved. And the number can be kind of surprisingly high. There are also things that you're doing anyway, such as responding to the vulnerabilities that are coming in. If you're a big enough company, you are spending money on this, and the costs are kind of higher if you have it happen just kind of as issues come up and nobody owns that response than if you had somebody whose job it was to respond to it. So once you know what you're spending, you can look to spend that money more effectively. And then a cornerstone to a good application security program is measuring what you're doing so that you can prove that what you're doing is valuable and that you can do things with more that would provide more value to the company if you had the money to do so. So you want to justify any spending. And so with that, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This is a philosophical question. A lot of people in the app security space think that every developer should be a security expert. We think that the security is a real challenging field, particularly when you get into even the simplest of crypto problems. It gets really difficult really quickly to understand what to do. It shouldn't be a developer's job. I mean, it's a full-time job for guys like us to understand the app security space. How can a developer be expected to keep up and really keep his code secure? The average developer should not be expected to be a security expert. We should be relying on a relatively few people that we try to impart with expertise and then let the average developer be a developer and provide him the tools to do his job with the proper controls in place to keep him from shooting the company's foot off. All right. Security is everybody's problem. It should be pretty obvious. David will talk a little bit more about this later. Now we're going to talk about what companies building application security practices, companies with good application security practices actually do. They break up into 7 different best practice areas that we're going to go into. The first one is awareness and training programs. So, you know, the goal of a good training program is pretty obvious. You know, you're trying to convince people there's a problem. You're trying to get developers to avoid the problem in the first place. The good thing about this is that most organizations have a training budget set aside for development, and so you can do security training on the cheap by actually leveraging the existing training budget. So if you're willing to sacrifice some other piece of training that, you know, I'm not going to give you that C++, advanced C++ class this year because I'd rather you take a security class that's more valuable. You know, that the training was already budgeted for. You just applied it to security, and it didn't really cost you anything. So that's a big plus. Doing training well is really difficult, though. Most people don't. So Eggerdale was pretty good at explaining why this is, and this is true for the way we learn in general. So he asked the question, how do we learn? You can see right here, we clearly learn best by actually doing. And training, the typical training, even this training that I'm doing today, really is up in the 50% retention range, where you're listening to what I say and you're looking at some slides, but you're not really getting to internalize anything I say. So, you know, the complexity of security stuff makes this far worse. And, you know, we've measured this somewhat, but I can say more anecdotally, the average security training, even when it's good people doing a good job giving the training, the retention rate goes something like this. About 60% of the developers don't give a damn about what you have to say. They aren't listening. They don't want to be there. They are just there because their boss made them show up, and they're not happy about it. Another 20% just really don't get it, but they probably want to. They get a little bit of it, but it's not important enough to their job. They don't feel like they need it day to day, and so they forget almost all of it. They might retain about 10% of it after no more than a month. So very, very quick loss of knowledge there. 10% already knew all the material, you were wasting your time, and then the other 10% are going to forget about half of it after about a year. So those are the people that are you're actually having a positive impact on. So you know, just doing training is pretty challenging. You want to make sure to do a good job training. Because of this, and because of our philosophy that the average developer should be security aware, not a security expert, we actually don't like training that goes too deep. I think that you know, people are less likely to retain things. You want to basically teach people about the tools that you're using in your organization. You want to teach them basic awareness, and you want them to know where to go for a problem. So beyond that, you want to be as hands-on as possible. Provide them recipes, provide them worksheets, provide them labs, but not for the complicated stuff. I mean, no one should ever have to, the average C and C++ developer doesn't really need to know how a buffer overflow is exploited, does he? I mean, I don't think it really helps them write better code, and if it does, some of them it will, but most of them it won't. And on the whole, it's not cost effective in the slightest. So, all right, so you generally want